Hello, everyone. I'm Daz, and welcome to American Civil War and UK History podcast. This presentation is available as a video on my YouTube channel or as a podcast wherever you get a podcast from. And remember, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Now, for those of you that have been following my pages, might know that I am actually vice chairman of a organisation called Monuments for UK Veterans of the American Civil War. Myself and my chairperson Gina have actually appeared on Emergency Civil War, and we've been doing some pushing, but we are coming on my platform because we want to give it another little push, so anyway, joining me today is chairperson of the organisation and the founder of all this is Gina Denham. Welcome, Gina.
Welcome, Dad. Thank you for that welcome.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're joint founders.
We are,
we
aren't
both
we,
had
really?
a similar, kind of both had similar ideas, and you just wound me up like a little clockwork monkey or
I don't
whatever.
think you need much of that, but there you go.
No, you just basically ignite the small flame until it becomes like an all-consuming fire in my life.
Anyway, also joining us is artist who designed our sculpture, and this is going to go on our final monument in the cemetery, hopefully in North London. Welcome, Stuart Stefany.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
How is Chicago today? Is it Chicago?
Yeah, well, I live in one of these little post-industrial towns about halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee on the shores of Lake Michigan. It's a pleasant day, beautiful autumn day, 2nd of October, and about 60 degrees and partly sunny. Very nice.
Nice. Okay, so we're going to go right back to the beginning, Gina, and we're going to start with the story of George Denham.
Okay, so George Denham, my great-great-grandfather, was on the USS Chickasaw, as well as previously serving with Company E, 111th Pennsylvania Volunteers. Now, of course, I know all this because of the subsequent research, but my family's first understanding of George Denham was very simply that he told my grandfather, Alfred Denham, when Alfred was probably younger than 12 years of age, loosely about that he'd been in the American Civil War. Not much more material than that, other than apparently what we know is that this person, George Denham, got a pension from the American government until the day he died. So I kind of assumed he must have served on the Union side. So as a youngster, that story very loosely was passed down to my mum, and my mum passed it on to me. In about 2005, having researched my paternal side of the family tree, I decided to start shedding light on the Denham side of my family. And obviously, as we got through to the mid-1860s, I suddenly, by process of elimination, worked out that this family member was in fact George Denham, because even at that time, I didn't even know his name. And about 17 years of research, and eventually it probably got to about the year 2018, and I was documenting some of his life experiences. And then through perhaps the period of time where COVID hit us, I suddenly realized that actually if I didn't tell anybody his story, the travesty of it would die with me. And I couldn't bear that, the idea of having worked so hard to, if you like, the pages of history had almost been blurred in terms of his experiences. They'd been lost from memory, and I felt that was a travesty. So, and that's what led me to the book about the Spartan that climbed Lookout Mountain, as the 111th were called by Senator Francis, who met the 111th in Chattanooga in December 1863, observed them standing there at attention on that cold sort of December day, on I think December 9th. And he saw their tattered flag that had survived Walhatchee, Lookout Mountain, Missionary Ridge, Ringgold Gap against Patrick Cleburne's defenders. And he said that he couldn't believe that flag that he'd seen, many months earlier, these tattered remnants, was the same flag, and he referred to those men as noble Spartans. And it kind of occurred to me that would be a good name for him and his comrades, the Spartans who climbed Lookout Mountain. Wow. Now, moving forward, in learning about George Denham, I found out that when he came back to England in 1910, he became member number 8 of the London branch of American Civil War Veterans, an organisation I'd never heard of. Again, if you like, other than a few perhaps academics, not many people know about them. And it kind of gave me a good feeling that in his twilight years that he had the comradeship, a very unusual form of comradeship of Civil War veterans in London, thousands of miles away from the continent of North America. Very unusual. There were no Grand Army of the Republic posts in the UK. They considered the idea in 1909. I can tell you a little bit about that later. But the London branch, whilst it wasn't affiliated to the Grand Army of the Republic, if you like, followed their ethos in terms of fraternity, charity, and loyalty. So that's kind of where we are with George Denham. Led me to the other London branch veterans, one of whom was James Cleggett. And in the search for James Cleggett, I found Stuart Stefany.
Yeah.
And that's where we are today.
Anyway, just going back to George, because I want to, so again, so you obviously he gets his pension eventually, but then obviously you, after all the research and after all the work, you find out where he's buried, and then you and your mum Barbara go and visit the cemetery for the first time.
Yes.
So tell us about your experience about visiting the cemetery for the first time.
Oh my goodness! In 2005, 2006, we'd written to Pancras and Islington Cemetery, and I'd found I'd actually obtained his full pension file from the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And according to their records, he was buried at Pancras and Islington Cemetery. But according to the cemetery, he was not buried there. So you can imagine that was a sense of frustration for 15 years. I was so close to him and yet so far. But through the databases that are online, I suddenly read that we found out actually he was buried there. And you can imagine in those months during the sort of summer of 2010 to 2020, when we were kind of very limited on what we could do, a day out in the open, sparing time with my mum, going to the cemetery in London, felt like a good idea. So I imagined, unfortunately, because online they had a pro forma image of a headstone that just happened to say George on it. Coincidentally, this was on Deceased Online. And of course, we went up there looking for a headstone that said George. And as you can see from the picture of my mum, that was his grave. You can imagine it just filled me with so much sadness that knowing everything I could about him, that his life was marked by tree stumps and deadfall and, 100 years worth of ivy growing over his remains, as it were. And I couldn't believe it. And as you can see to that picture on the right, I took a federal forage cap with us and a replica of the medal that was issued to the veterans, and sort of placed it on his grave as the first tentative steps to memorialise my great-great-grandfather. So it was a bittersweet experience. I've been filled with so much hope. Imagine for some of your listeners the experience of Alex Haley in the TV show Roots, where he goes back to Africa and he finds the kind of his family you talk about. And I kind of imagine that this would be my Civil War version moment of that experience. I'd find the headstone and it would give me all this information about him and his life on this headstone. But sadly, there was nothing. His memory, literally, any essence of him lived on perhaps within me and my mum and everything I knew about him. So it's quite a sad day. And I started as I've already said to you at the beginning of this podcast, there was a small flame ignited that day when we drove back from the cemetery, a flicker of an idea about how we could address that. And as you see from that next slide, that's exactly what we did. I realised that the Department of Veteran Affairs can provide at no charge a burial marker for any veteran of any American conflict, wherever they may be buried throughout the world. And that's exactly what I got for George.
I mean, let's talk about, so obviously, like you said, people seen in the previous photograph and as you described it, all overgrown, but you actually did the work, a lot of that work yourself, you and your mum, didn't you?
Yeah, so you can imagine, I know the Griffins, who are buried next door to George Denham, the Sheffields, and all the other families around him. And in fact, it may not surprise you, Daz, I've already been in contact with the descendants of the people buried around.
Well, I'm not surprised.
So, because I was interested. Like, we'd have conversations with them, and I felt as though I couldn't just clean George Denham's grave up. I had to clear up all the other veterans and people buried around him. So, as you can see, it's a stark difference now to how it was years ago. I mean, as you can see in the background, you've got lots of trees and partial headstones in the distance. That cemetery was first built in about 1854, was a former farm, and was an overflow cemetery for those who'd passed away in sort of London. So Pancras Cemetery is probably about, 15, 20 miles away from central London, maybe not that far. So yeah. So
how many visits did you actually make to clear the area?
Quite a few, probably about 5 or 6. So obviously we had to wait for the headstone to be delivered. Once it was delivered, then we set about actually putting the fence around it, putting a burial marker there where the flag was put in. So it was about 5 or 6 trips, and then obviously on the day of the subsequent dedication, we also got, and it would be a travesty if I didn't mention that, the cemetery themselves, the staff there at Pancras and Islington Cemetery, Sean Holloway, one of my contacts there, were absolutely phenomenal, and they did a lot of work clearing away trees that had grown through some of the some of the graves. As you can see there with that picture on the right, on the day of the dedication, we had, and which is how I got to meet you actually, is all the members of the Southern Skirmish Association, the Ensign John Davis, Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War, the pastor from the Denham Family Church, which is just down the road from the cemetery, lots of George's descendants who I'd never met before, the mayor of Islington. It was just a great day, and even the cemetery provided those green mats, because although it was in July, it started raining, as you recall, and it was a good day. And as you can see,
so what was that like emotionally, though, after all that many years of research and work, and clearing the cemetery yourself, and what was that like for you that day?
Oh, it was brilliant. It kind of illustrates to me that in the acts of remembrance, time sometimes doesn't actually have time. For me, 107 years or so had passed since his actual physical passing from this planet, as it were. His remains had laid there for 107 odd years or thereabouts. And when Brian Davidson, Sergeant First Class from the United States Embassy, gave his eulogy, and funny enough, he was from Tennessee, where George had fought in 1863. And when Brian saluted that grave, it was, for me, the finished business, the end story to George's story, which then led on to perhaps where we are today. That was a great moment. It was a great moment. I realised that George Denham connected me to so many people. That Irving Yalom, the author, kind of very existential, talks about rippling and about the idea that all of us make ripples in our lives that play forward long after we are gone. Now, George Denham's ripples were getting fainter and fainter, But somehow, when that flame was ignited that first day that me and my mum went out there, I didn't realise how bright it would shine, and how bright it would burn, and how it would lead me to some other exciting, wonderful experiences. So yeah, what an amazing day. Even the rain didn't really taint the experience. It was just wonderful.
Yeah. And I can remember hearing about this for the first time. So we was at a reenactment, something it was about 2 weeks before, and we got briefed that you had contacted Southern Skirmish Association, and the minute I heard about that, I just couldn't stop thinking about it, because for me, do it or go into an American Civil War's grave, I didn't think that would ever happen. Veterans' grave. So but to be part of a dedication was just amazing. And so for me, it was an amazing experience too, and I've been to 2 now, more to come.
Yeah.
But anyway,
there was one thing that totally also blew my mind. Now, I hadn't actually met you until that day. We'd spoken on telephone, but to see those boys in blue, to see Union soldiers guiding people into the cemetery, standing at attention by his grave, and also wearing the white star of his division, was just the most amazing thing that I could never imagine would occur that day that me and my mum first went there. It was amazing. And so there were 2 parts of it. There were probably 3, up to many parts, but connection, the ripples, seeing you guys in those Union uniforms, and that final salute of Brian Davidson, Sergeant First Class from the US Embassy. Just amazing.
Yeah. And we did a little interview, didn't we, in the pub afterwards? And Gina's famous words were, go on.
To be continued.
Right, okay. And then in January 2022, after having a phone conversation with you, we decided to form Monuments for UK Veterans of the American Civil War.
Correct.
And so, yeah, and that's where we are today as far as that's concerned. But you then, in April, I think it was April, you decided to go on a little road trip, didn't you, to America, to follow in George's footsteps. So I'd like you to talk about your experience of going there and following in the footsteps. And I believe you had like a little moment at Lookout Mountain or something like that. So talk about that. But also you meet a very important person along the way. So talk us about your trip to America following in George's footsteps.
So my cousin Sarah, I imagined that I was going to take this trip on my own, but my cousin Sarah, she'd never been to America before. She liked the idea because we were going to fly into Nashville. She likes country and western, so it was a blended tour, a bit of country, a bit of western, and a lot of Civil War. And we started the experience, so we literally retraced his footsteps as best we could. So Murfreesboro, Stones River, then we went down to Christiana, and eventually, as we were driving down, one of the important parts of this was I knew I'd looked through the lens of history. So I'd looked through history through the lens of the people who'd been there back in the day. So journalists, other peers of George Denham, so those who he'd served with on the Chickasaw, or the men of the 111th. As being a former cop, it was important to me to conduct this as a cold case investigation. So we say, for example, if I needed to get some facts around what you were doing on a given day and I was unable to get your account, I'd find the people who were with you. So for me, I knew when I was going down to Waxahachie, I had a really vivid image of it in my mind's eye. And that trip to Tennessee was almost like doing the visit to what in essence, what was a crime scene. I'd gathered all my evidence, I'd got witness accounts, and now I was going to the place that it happened. And I recall as we were driving down the interstate, and it was raining quite a lot, and I remember seeing a mountain in front of us, and it was like almost ingrained in my mind's eye. I'd never been to Lookout Mountain, but I'd visited it many times through books, etc. And sure enough, yeah.
It must have been quite emotional for you.
Oh my God,
Walking on
yeah,
that ground, you know, that your great grandfather
absolutely.
had been
Yeah,
and
yeah,
experienced, and you was breathing the
yeah,
same air and
yeah.
seeing the
So
same things, you know.
I never, so when we saw Lookout Mountain, because I said to Sarah, I said, I think that's Lookout Mountain. And by the time I realised it was Lookout Mountain, we were already driving halfway up Lookout Mountain. We'd gone past the junction at Kelly's Ferry Road to go actually up to where Warhatchee happened. So we actually went backwards. We'd gone past it. But yeah, I remember a standout moment with Richard Mannion, who does White Star Tours, who was our guide, as it were. And we in the area. So once the 111th crossed Warhatchee Creek, whilst we didn't actually cross the creek itself, we made our way to where they crossed, and Richard talked us through it. So this is a big shout out to Richard Mannion, because he also did a lot of bespoke research for this very unique trip. And I remember sitting in an area where the 111th had marched through, you know, on that morning when they attacked Lookout Mountain. And we were sitting there and we were eating the most wonderful cake that we'd got in a store in near the hotel that we were staying in Chattanooga. And the trees were quiet. And I remember history had happened here. Men had died here. Men, you know, this was a scene of a decisive battle in the Chattanooga campaign. And yeah, really, really, really weird, but also as if it was, again, another part of the experience that I had to do. So yeah, amazing.
And along the way, you meet a couple of people. One of them being this guy.
Oh, Chuck, yeah.
Yeah. Tell us about meeting Chuck and you know.
Okay. So first off, I'd already discussed with Stuart before a proposed itinerary of travel from Nashville back up to Chicago. My cousin, I said to Sarah, look, let's drive it. And the reason why we could drive it is then I could go to Cairo, Illinois. It's spelt Cairo, but it's pronounced as Cairo. Stuart had kind of given me a heads up of what I could expect at Cairo. And sure enough, the description was very good, but it didn't deter me from going. So Cairo, really interesting experience. But from Cairo, he'd also explained to me about why don't you go to Springfield, because you've got the tomb of Abraham Lincoln there. And I kind of had a bit of a debt of gratitude to Abraham Lincoln, because once he issued the declaration in 1864 that former sailors could transfer to the US Navy, that was kind of George's opportunity to get out of, you know, let's face it, the risks of being an infantryman in the Union Army. There were great risks in the Navy, but it tended to be, if you was on an ironclad like the Chickasaw, if it went down, it'd go down in about 10 seconds. But you're in an ironclad, so there were other risks, scalds, burns, etc. But so I kind of felt that on Stuart's recommendation, he was kind of my long distance tour guide, that I should go to Springfield, Illinois. And he also said that the Grand Army of the Republic Memorial Museum was also based there. Now, I contacted Chuck and explained that part of my reasons for going there was that I was aware that they had some material related to the London branch of American Civil War veterans, and would it be possible for me to, you know, get copies, etc. Now, Chuck and I didn't know each other, but oh my God, what an amazing guy. We turned up, and as you can see, he wears his Hawaiian shirt. I just love his attitude to life. He let me look at all the paperwork, which you can see in that picture. I was just like, this was amazing. This was like the kind of Christmas day for me, because it gave me lots more information about the London branch. And obviously other material related to the Grand Army of the Republic. It was just a great part of the trip. Unexpected. I like these unexpected moments. And then Chuck in the evening invited us out, and we had this fantastic meal in the diner opposite the home of Abraham Lincoln. It's a
Oh,
great
wow.
day. Yeah, just a great experience. Unexpected, and obviously I have to thank Stuart for that because it was just so amazing. So yeah, that's
Okay.
Chuck. Love
And
it.
again, you've mentioned Stuart there, and obviously one of the connections there was obviously James Cleggett. So,
Yes.
okay then. So you obviously connected with Stuart before you went out, is that right?
Yeah. Do you want me to tell you
Okay.
about that? Oh, there
Yes,
you go.
please, and then we can
Yeah.
bring in Stuart then.
Okay, so um, imagine that, like that very small light sorry, flame that had ignited at Pancras and Finchley Cemetery about getting a headstone for George Denham. George Denham connected me to other London branch members. I was obviously given a lot of information by the author Michael Hammerson, so I'm very appreciative of everything that he gave me in terms of the London branch because it really opened my eyes. Um, and so I knew that James Cleggett, who was member number 11 of the London branch of American Civil War veterans, had returned to Chicago probably about 1922. So he was born in New York in about 1945. A free black man, and he had enlisted as a landsman on the USS Morning Light, and in 1863 at Sabine Pass got captured by the Confederates and spent a couple of years in detention with them. Interestingly, earlier tonight I was looking at newspaper articles, and whilst another London branch veteran was with him, um, James Cleggett was never even mentioned in the newspapers at the time. His pension file is super thick, suggesting that he spent years trying to convince the pension bureau of his service. In how we might say in England, James Cleggett had a rum deal. He was much respected by the London branch. He brought to the table lots of experience about how to get a pension, and he was an integral part. And I'm going to suggest that he knew my great-grandfather because he was member 11 and George Denham was member number 8. Whilst I may not be family of James Cleggett, I am his psychological family, and I feel that it was absolutely essential that if we were going to go to Chicago, then we needed to go to Cook County, Illinois, and pay our respects to his service to the Union. You know, again, 95 years had passed since his death in 1929. And so I reached out to Stuart and a couple of other members of Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War, explained who I was, what I wanted to do. And as you can see, the plan was put in place, and it also, and as much as the day was going to be, so we drove from Springfield up to Cook County, Illinois, and it was going to be quite a cold. The weather we would forecast. I was being warned that if a tornado hits on the way up, park underneath a freeway. I'm like, oh my god, what have I got into? But yeah, I'm just watching Stuart's face as we talk because he's probably remembering everything that I was advised, ingrained in my memory. So we went up to Cook County. A couple of the groundsmen met us there, lovingly marked out to the very inch where they knew that James Cleggett was buried, without even the honour of any burial marker. Absolute travesty. Yeah. And I'd already made a marker before we came out from the UK, which you can just see in the centre there, like a brass plaque with the Stars and Stripes and the Union Jack placed within it jointly. And then we took our replica London branch banner as well, to afford him the honour of that remembrance on behalf of myself, a descendant of a London branch of American Civil War veterans. I felt as though I was conveying that heartfelt message of respect and thanks, to James from his former comrades. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So Stuart, sorry, you haven't forgotten about you, mate. So we'll bring you in now, Stuart. You're a member of the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War and a reenactor. But so tell us a little bit more about yourself, because you're an artist as well, aren't you?
Right. Well, I've been a member of the Sons of Union Veterans for about 20 or 21 years now, and the family that I was raised in, the generations were gapped pretty far apart, so that my great grandfather served in the American Civil War, and that's kind of unusual to be a member of Generation X and have a great grandfather Civil War veteran. And he was in the 4th Michigan Cavalry, and their family, they're the Howes, and they're related to, he was a cousin of Julia Ward Howe, who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And so this was, so I kind of grew up with this. So my grandmother was born when my great-grandfather was in his 60s. And so this is kind of an unusual thing. We had a number of people who were, up until just recently, we had a number of people who were called true sons, and these are people who are the living children of Civil War veterans. And I think the last one in Illinois died about 2 years ago, or recently. So anyway, so this was part of my experience, and he's my great grandfather. He was at Battle Stones River, as well. So Stones River veterans. So this has been, I've had a long time kind of interest and fascination in Civil War history for one reason or another. And it's always the thing that's kind of seemed to be more recent to me than other people in my generation. So that's kind of the history of how I kind of got into the Civil War stuff. When I went in, we've got, our organization has had, highs and lows, and so we're kind of on a rebound of membership. And after joining it, it wasn't long before, maybe a matter of 4 years or something, between becoming a member, that I ended up becoming department commander of the entire state of Illinois, which was, there was a need, and I served. So that's kind of my thing. And as the department commander, I worked on trying to rebuild the state, looking at for people who are interested. My real interest was to build a membership with really intelligent, creative, ingenious people, so I don't have to do that anymore. And I was successful. So that's kind of my background with that. Now my art background is, I have a long-term interest in art, and it's always been kind of figurative art, and always kind of like art from that period of, say, like 1870 to about 1920. So that would be Beaux-Arts style art, and also Art Nouveau. Chicago and Illinois has a number of excellent sculptures that they were around me, but I didn't realize the people who made them, right? Because Chicago was a superpower hub in the American Civil War. The American Civil War made Chicago, really. And because what happened with Chicago is two things. I mean, Chicago, for a while, was the second largest city in the United States, and one of the largest industrial cities in the U.S. too. And what happened with Chicago was that you had two things. One was huge government military contracts poured money into Chicago's industry to make factories for war materials and things like that. But the other thing was the Confederates closed the navigation of the Mississippi. And so once the Mississippi was closed, navigation, all of the agriculture that would normally go to river boats, and then they go down the Mississippi and then they exit out through New Orleans, had to go upriver instead of downriver. And so all of that commerce had to go up the Mississippi and then up the Illinois River and up to the Illinois Canal and then out through the Great Lakes. And that total reversal the combination of war materials, being a center hub for railroads, and and also the reversal of commerce going up the Mississippi to Chicago and then out through the Great Lakes, totally made the city what it was. And now it's huge. So the people of Chicago, there were a lot of Civil War veterans, and Illinois before Abraham Lincoln was known as the Sucker State, which is not very complimentary. And so we went from becoming the Sucker State to the land of Lincoln. And Lincoln is we're kind of a one-tune Charlie as far as that goes, and Lincoln's it. Kind of hammer that out because our choice is Lincoln or Al Capone. And so there are these amazing places in Chicago that are steeped in Civil War history. And the Chicago Historical Society used to have on display this amazing collection of Civil War artifacts. They had the wall, they're now, I think, part of the Lincoln Museum. They loaned them to the Lincoln Museum, but used to be on display in Chicago. They had the wall of Libby Prison, where all the Union POWs were kept. They had the desk that Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. They had John Brown's Bowie knife. They had, they had the desk that Lee signed surrender to Ulysses S. Grant. They had the bed that Lincoln died on. They had all of these amazing artifacts, and they're all kind of like in this shrine of both the American Civil War and also Abraham Lincoln. So that was like a big kind of formative thing for me as well. They had built an amazing hall for the Grand Army of the Republic in Chicago, and Gina has seen it restored, which is palatial, and kind of staggering. They also had a number of sculptures around the city, and among those, some sculptures we've got 3 sculptures by America's finest sculptor from that period, who is Augustus St. Gaudens. And Augustus St. Gaudens is famous for doing the Shaw Memorial in Boston, and people who've seen the movie Glory are familiar with that, the story, and also they feature it at the end of the movie. But he also did a seated statue of Lincoln. He did a standing statue of Lincoln. He did a huge equestrian statue of General Logan, which is in Grant Park. Chicago has a peculiarity. The statue of Lincoln is in Grant Park, and the statue of Grant is in Lincoln Park. We don't really know why, but there you go. And
I'd like to say something there. We have a replica of your statue from Chicago in London in Parliament Square. And there was only two gifted, one to London and one to Mexico.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
So when you come to London, I'll take you to visit it.
Yeah. So maybe I've been to London once. It was a long time ago. I think it was like 1992. So it's been 30 years. So and we also have a statue of Phil Sheridan by Goodson Borglum, who would go on to do the sculpt Mount Rushmore. And so we have all these kind of Civil War statuary around the city. And so that's kind of a thing that kind of inspired me as an artist. So I always had an interest in traditional figurative art. When I went to school, I went to the Kansas City Art Institute to get my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, and then I had a number of different professions, including I served 11 years as an architectural model maker for Columbian Models and Exhibit Works. And did some works there that some of the stuff I did model for the U-505 that ended up in the Museum of Science and Industry. That's a captured German submarine that's on display. So if you ever desired to be on a captured German U-boat, we've got an entire captured German U-boat here in Chicago.
Wow.
And we've got. Let's see where I was going. Oh, and of course, they used what was really fun was they used one of the models I worked on in the movie Batman Dark Knight with Heath Ledger. And so there's a scene before the Joker drops the dead guy up against the window, and in the background there's a model of the building that I built. I was involved in a lot of these things. Then I decided to go back to school, get a certification to teach and to teach art. And I did that. I went back to school, the Art Institute, and then also Lake Forest College. And Lake Forest College is one of the older schools for the Midwest. So we're talking just 1850s. But back in the 1850s, there was a fellow, local guy, who was a friend with Lincoln. His name was Elmer Ellsworth, and he went around creating units of zouaves. And so he created a zouave unit, the Lake Forest Zouaves at Lake Forest College, where I was going. So that's I'd already been a reenactor with Chicago Light Artillery, but I also started doing the reenacting the zouave thing as well. You see me in my zouave uniform. Yes, thing.
Yeah, carry on.
So that kind of brings us up. So I was serving again as camp commander. I'd already served as department commander, and just came through the email that Gina wanted to do this memorial for James Claggett. And so I guess this thing bounced around, and I said, okay, well, I've got to get on top of this. And so things just kind of developed from there.
Okay.
I'd previously done a whole number of works for Sons of Union veterans. I had done a memorial bronze for the 200th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln, his birthday in 2009. I had done 2 memorials for the Battle of Altoona Pass down in Georgia. One I did for the state of Illinois, and then people from Minnesota liked the one for Illinois so much that they asked me to do one for them too. So those are 2 large granite markers down in Altoona Pass, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. I also designed a plaque about so large for the Last Soldier Project, and that's on bronze, and so those things showed up on graves. Those are for to memorialize the last soldier from a particular county who passed away. So we put those things on, and we're going to be doing a ceremony for our last soldier here in Lake County. His name was Silas P. Nichols, and as a young man, he shook the hand of Abraham Lincoln when he was on campaign here in Illinois. So we put this thing together, and then after the ceremony, I guess Mark, or before the ceremony, Mark Braun, who's one of our members, and he's kind of a savant when it comes to where people are buried. And he's compiled like this list of 40,000 graves in Union soldiers in Illinois. Was showing around, and I think he showed Gina the last soldier plaque that I'd sculpted, and I think I hope she reacted favorably to
that. Yeah. Do you want me to comment, Daz?
Yeah, comment. Go for it.
No, I mean, you'd obviously, because it's not that far from James Claggett, is it? It's about 100 feet, if that. And I've seen that. Then you'd show me the one of Abraham Lincoln, because Daz has seen it. He's very jealous.
Yeah, very jealous. Very jealous.
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen it. I mean, you can imagine how. I mean, I just thought this is like destiny.
Yeah.
It was,
because I think that was where didn't you say something like do you realize I can do sculptures? I think it was just in passing, because it was quite a windy day. The rain held off until the end of the dedication. Everything was a good fit that day, but obviously we had some brief conversations, and I think it was at that point you went, and then you gave me that pack with lots of stuff in it. Well, you can imagine it was, and I think I told Daz, I'm like, look, I think our plan needs to
Yeah.
change, because we'd obviously thought about getting another idea, and seeing that was just.
And of course that will lead into obviously the monument, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But just at the moment, I'd like to come back to the UK, because in June, you attend. Well, firstly, you joined the Southern Skirmish Association, didn't you, Gina?
Yeah.
And then you attended your first event at Hastings, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So this is the first ever time, ladies and gentlemen, that we had a table up, and that we had been in front of or Gina had been in front of the public, because I was actually taking part in the display. Now we were taking part in a 70 gun salute for Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II, God rest her soul. But so tell us about your experience of doing that for the first time, Gina.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience. Whilst I've not mentioned it on this podcast, I've always been involved in living history, but from the element of World War II, and from the American involvement, I've always had that kind of tentative interest in American Civil War history. But again, because I didn't know anybody, but then obviously I met you. I met people from the Backtails, Simon and Bo Carrigan. They'd come along. I'd met other people, and I kind of liked what I saw. And for me, whilst there may be other people who have a difference of opinion, my thoughts are that if I go along to a living history event concerning the Civil War, that I can bridge those questions when people say, well, why would a British person reenact an American? Because now they can just point towards my display and go and see that. So there might be part of the living history element to say that, because the London branch of American Civil War veterans didn't start until 1910, but as some people have said, that if you go to, say, for example, a living history event in America, you may get representatives from the Women's Relief Corps, the daughters and sons of Union veterans of the Civil War, but all the different kind of parts of that community. And I certainly found in Hastings, where incidentally there is an American Civil War veteran buried, I can't remember his name, but I believe he was a quartermaster, that I got quite a good reception. I got to meet other people in SOSCAN, the Southern Skirmish Association, and I'd say in the main, but I got a warm welcome. We got donations, etc. There was a good interaction with the public, and it kind of, again, the flame was getting brighter. The flame was getting bigger, and I was getting more interest. So great event. We did get some donations, and it gave me an opportunity to showcase the idea of creating a monument in the UK for veterans. And granted, there is one up in Scotland, but it recognises the involvement of Scottish American soldiers with just a few names on there. And I'm not diminishing that, but to date, a monument that recognises all UK veterans of the American Civil War who came back and history is almost forgotten seemed to be a good fit.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And again, here's one with the whole of Southern Skirmish Association at the Focus and Ashford Military Show. Now, what I want to do now is talk about the banners, because obviously you've got two different banners. You've got a smaller version and a larger version. Let's talk about the origins of this banner, because I've got a great picture here of the original and the one that you created. So tell us about what inspired you to want to make a replica banner.
So again, it's shedding light. I mean, I obviously had a very, I like the ethos of what the London branch did. That they weren't affiliated to the Grand Army of the Republic, but they reflected the ethos of the Grand Army of the Republic, in terms of, peer support and all the hierarchy of needs that were perhaps enjoyed by their American comrades, back in North America. But in England, these veterans were mostly isolated. I'm doing the research for my second book, and you can just read some of the difficult situations that these veterans were in, because they didn't know anybody else. Whereas the Americans perhaps had the support of Grand Army of the Republic posts. They could get comrades to write testimonies to validate a pension application. But these pensioners, these London branch veterans, really, prior to the formation of the London branch in 1910, were very isolated. There may be a couple who knew each other, but Ensign John Davis, the founding father of the London branch, a real mover and shaker of his time, and really manipulated the newspapers at the time to great advantage, created the London branch of American Civil War veterans. He was a missionary, and he'd gone to, either through his visits to the US Embassy, had come across other veterans, and that discussion took place very much like, I think it was Benjamin Stevenson who first created the Grand Army of the Republic. Yeah. Druggist in Illinois, had that same conversation with his tent comrade during the Civil War, that perhaps at the conclusion of the war they could create some form of society. And blow me down, Ensign John Davis literally had that same conversation with his comrades in London in 1910, and so was born the London branch of American Civil War veterans. Now, there are no other branches of American Civil War veterans, although, if you want me to talk about it, there was the idea of another branch in Lancashire in 1999, but it never came to fruition. So that banner, as you can see, the London branch of US Civil War veterans, there are two, because that one that we took to Chicago, it's very big. And I'm not sure scale-wise, it's the same scale as the original. So me being me, decided that I might need to get a smaller one.
But also that's helped with the Southern Skirmish displays, because depending on, what the situation is, you can have either or whatever.
Yeah, also, and go on. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, just the displays, I think how it seems to work at the moment is that with some of the skirmish, you seem to get the Federal camp and the Confederate camp. And there seems to be this kind of area in between that nobody seems to be in. And I seem to find, certainly as past events, it seems to be that's where I go. And I quite like that, because I'm not part of the display, but I'm with the display. I mean, I could, and I have found that in the main, people are interested, because I have to point out that we aren't literally the real London branch, that it's a replica banner, because... but yeah, it's interesting.
Again, you created another banner as well, which is just amazing, because you created this one, and it was inspired by the photograph, wasn't it? And I believe that is John Davis, is it?
Yes. Yep. So
in the banner.
Yeah. So that banner, it was that flag. I think what it is again that cold case investigation. Gather the facts, squeeze the data, get the information out. And I was looking at that picture, and I suddenly noticed the word "gone home" on the right, where John Davis is leading the kind of ceremony in the afternoon of Edward Munro, one of the oldest veterans of the American Civil War, who'd been born in Nova Scotia and died in 1915, and he was buried in East London. And if you look at that banner with the charismatic John Davis, and he definitely was. You only have to read some of his letters and articles to really get a full measure of the personality that I feel he was. And he's carrying that banner, and it said "Gone Home." Now, what we did, we created the "Gone Home" banner so that we can afford those veterans 100 years after their passing that honour that perhaps they didn't always get at the time of their passing. We are literally Monument to the UK Veterans and American Civil War Association picking up the banner of those London branch veterans and, taking on their work. We're not trying to diminish the work of anybody else. And I think that's really important to say. We will work with anybody who aspires to the same principles as perhaps the Grand Army of the Republic, the sons of Union veterans of the Civil War and daughters, and the Women's Relief Corps. We want to work with people. And so I think that's the thing I like about what we do.
And just briefly, so this is one of the, because you carry, when you're doing your display, you have a book with a lot of the information in, but you you are the one that sits there evening after evening trying to crack these cold cases, aren't you? So just tell us a
Yeah,
little bit about that. And the way you
yeah,
spend your evenings is literally in front of a laptop and
yeah.
doing all your research.
I mean, you think about it, 26 years as a cop, carrying out investigations, going from the unknown to the known, trying to put yourself in the position of what would people do, being open-minded and all of that. I mean, whilst I know, for example, that other people have done some research, a lot of it isn't available for anyone to pick up on. Only yesterday, I emailed Stuart the current spreadsheet that you see in front of you, which at the moment stands at about 529 veterans or people involved in some way. So it could be widows as well. There were some members of the London branch who were veterans of the Mexican War and also the Spanish War towards the latter part of the 1800s.
Yeah.
So they weren't, whilst they were called the London Branch of American Civil War veterans, they weren't all veterans solely of that conflict. Now, there is potentially one member who may have also reluctantly found himself serving in the Confederacy on account that perhaps he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was conscripted. He died in Herne Bay, but spent many years in Iowa. But yeah, it takes probably, on a real tough case, sometimes 3 or 4 hours in an evening getting it and using a bit of lateral thinking. But we are getting there slowly, and every so often, a little gem, a little nugget of great information. For example, Edward Munro's pension file has really got a lot of information within it on the London branch. James Cleggett had a shipmate called James Sidney Taplin, and within his pension file, there's a lot of information concerning what happened to the Morning Light. And I often wonder if Taplin and Cleggett had ever met and gone, I remember you. So, yeah, a lot of research is ongoing. And again, thanks to some of the SOSCAN members, because I know that we've got some more lists coming our way concerning other English, if you like, soldiers or personnel who served in a conflict. The research for the current book stands at apparently 50,000 foreign-born soldiers from England. Within that encompasses Ireland, according to the data, not Ireland, I beg your pardon, Wales, Scotland, etc., were involved in the American Civil War. And we have found probably 1 to 2% of that 50,000 did come back to the United Kingdom. So whilst we aspire to building that monument, we won't be stopping at the monument. It's important to say that we will be getting more more burial markers from the Department of Veteran Affairs. We've already got another veteran who served with George at the 111th, which is Francis McDougall, buried in East London, and that work continues. So we've got many strands in our work, as you know, Daz, which is not just to get the monument as much as we really do need that support.
I'm glad you said that, because one of them was this summer just gone, and we dedicated James O'Neill.
Yes.
Fantastic thing to be part of again. And again, this is literally a stone's throw from George's grave, isn't it? And again, what was that like for you? Because I know it's quite stressful leading up to it, isn't it? Trying to organise it.
Yeah, it is. And one of my drivers, we all have different drivers. One of mine is, my drivers are try hard, be perfect, and hurry up. So I want everything done. Yeah, there you go. So they're good drivers, but when I'm not aware of these drivers, they can become a crippling curse. But I think that's where my passion may be a good fit for the Monument Project. But sometimes I need to just take a back step.
Yeah.
But that day, it was almost, it was a super hot day. You can see there in that middle picture, Sergeant First Class Brian Davidson with the mayor from Islington unveiling the banner. And again, Brian Davidson did that speech. We had our Reeves. You can see behind Brian in that middle picture the Gone Home banner. and you can see the honour guard with Greg Jackson, Ralph, and a couple of other people from SOSCAN there. I can't see them all, but it was great. And again, my mum there, you can see her in that that picture on the left, between me and you. A good day, and again, very much supported by Islington Cemetery. Sorry, Pancras and Islington Cemetery. So yeah, a good day, and obviously we've now got Francis Albemarle McDougall of the 111th burial marker confirmed as being ordered by the Department of Veteran Affairs. So watch this space, probably in the spring. Yeah, great day.
And one of the coolest things about the day is we got to meet the grandson of John Davis. Now, this was for me, I didn't know he was going to be there. You might have known.
Yeah.
But for me, that was wow,
Yeah.
You look at the pictures and my goodness, do they look like each other?
Yeah.
Wow.
Lawrence, Lawrence Smith in the middle there, you and I. I know he's a member of, I believe, Ensign John Davis,
he is, yes.
Sons of Union Veterans of Civil War in London. We'd been told by them, whilst they couldn't come along because of previous engagement, that Lawrence was coming along. And I have to say that was a wonderful,
real pleasure, yeah.
Yeah, really, because again, being, knowing that his great-great-grandfather knew my great-grandfather and knew James Clegg. It was just it's a great experience, and perhaps for me the nice thing with Lawrence is that I do email him occasionally, keep him up to date as to what we're doing, is that where I find information out about his great-great-grandfather, I'll always share it with him to sort of again add some sort of flesh on the bones of the man who once was, as it were.
Cool. Okay, so Stu, we're going to bring you back in now because so eventually we're going to have a monument. We'll talk about the actual structure in a minute, but let's talk about the actual design of the sculpture that's going to go on the front, and how do we get to the point where you got to the point where it's finished near enough.
Well, this has been a collaborative effort all the way through, and so Gina was telling me about the size of what they wanted, and she had an idea with 3 figures on it, and then she mentioned something kind of like in the style of the Shaw Memorial, which I'm familiar with, the Shaw Memorial is probably the greatest American sculpture. And it took Augustus St. Gaudens 13 years to sculpt, and then once he was completed it, he took a copy of that to the 1900 Universal Exposition in Paris, and he won gold. They had a competition with all of these sculptors, in the world, including Europe, which has very, very, very accomplished artists, and he took the top prize. And apparently, Rodin was there and tipped his hat to the sculpture, and the French government knighted Augustus St. Gaudens, which is given the Legion of Honor. So that's kind of a tall order, that was setting the bar kind of high, but St. Gaudens is a person who I have a tremendous amount of reverence for, and in previous years I'd actually been to his studio is now National Park in New Hampshire, and I visited his studio, and so I'm really familiar with his work. And so I took her original idea and kind of sketched out a redesign of it, and submitted it to you folks. And you seem to be favorably inclined to that. And then we were talking about the text, and so Gina wanted to do the text from Oliver Wendell Holmes. It says, in our youth, our hearts were touched with fire, which is good both for veterans and for people like Burning Man. And
yeah. Yes. I like that.
And so so I really want to say, okay, so let's. All my life, I kind of wanted to do a sculpture in the style of those great Civil War sculptures, post-Civil War sculptures by folks like St. Gaudens. But that era is gone. There's no, and so we're in the. I went to art school in the age where people just weld I-beams together or glue Cheetos to a cardboard tube, and they call it a sculpture. And so I thought that I loved the challenge, and I kind of enthralled by it, and I've tried to push this thing as far as possible. And even stuff like St. Gaudens, I studied his stuff, and it was like raised text on the bottom and everything. So I had to figure out how he did the raised text. So I realized that, oh, well, you have to take some sort of object and then carve into it and then impress the clay into it and then remove the clay, and then your text is going to be raised. There are all these little things I had to kind of reverse engineer in order to make this thing as authentic looking as possible. I wanted, when this thing is built, give it about 15 years to age, somebody will walk through the cemetery and they'll think it's been there forever. That it's always been there, and I think that'd be the best possible result. And so even how I signed it, I deliberately didn't put the date and anything other than Roman numerals, because a lot of people just don't bother to read Roman numerals. So they're not going to see a glaring 2022 on the bottom. They're just going to see MMXXII. So it was a long process. It took about 10 weeks to sculpt. We went through about 3 different figures three or four different figures for our central figure, and until we arrived with the one that everybody likes best. And but so it's been a collaborative effort, and the results. I hope everybody's happy with it.
Definitely.
Okay. So Gina, can we just talk a little bit about the actual monument that the sculpture is going to go on, please, and just explain a little bit of what it's going to look like?
Okay, so again, Stuart kindly, not did he just obviously craft and sculpt that design based on our brief, and our brief was changing as it evolved. Our ideas evolved to make it a better fit. So originally, as you can see, there were 3 men on it representing both black and white culture, if you like, communities that served in the Civil War. But eventually, as you can see on the from the previous slide, eventually we went for, if you like, a black soldier, or the black sailor, the white soldier, and the woman in between. And there's much symbolism in this monument. It is a monument to the UK veterans of the American Civil War, and to my mind, those. We cannot name all the veterans because it's an ongoing piece of work, but it will, the design of the monument will afford people the opportunity, if they so wish, to put a time capsule inside with the names of the veteran known only unto them. The symbolism part of it was that the woman in the middle represented those women who served in the American Civil War, some of whom came home. So Gertrude Ledwith, who got a pension from the American government because of her services rendered. The woman represents the widow, the sibling, etc., that perhaps lost a loved one during the Civil War. And then the branch of services represent the army, and both the land and sea. So to my mind, they are literally symbolic of those who served in the American Civil War. We often get asked, well, what side do they represent? To my mind, it is a monument to UK veterans of the American Civil War Association. For me, ultimately, my interest lies in my Union heritage, but I'm not going to diminish the lived experience of a descendant of somebody who perhaps served in the Confederacy, and start making some value judgments on them. I have my own personal views about that, but it literally is a monument that celebrates inclusion and the diversity of the forces that people involved. So there's a lot of symbolism. On the plaque as well, you will see, are you able to go back to the previous slide, please?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, one of the things that I discussed with Stuart to represent that symbolism is that behind those three figures, you will see the silhouettes of other people, and they represent those veterans that we perhaps will never be able to identify, to recognise those people who've been lost to the past, lost from memory. So it was also a symbolic part of that that was important to me. Inclusion is always an important part of what we do here, which is why, as I said to you earlier, making sure that anybody can have a place at our table if they aspire to the principles. For those people who aspire to the same principles of the Grand Army of the Republic, the Women's Relief Corps, very much so, who were the big benefactors of the London branch, then obviously we would align ourselves with them.
Yeah.
So yeah, so a lot of symbolism in this monument. And on the next slide, so we Stuart's obviously. You've got the QR code if anybody's watching now and just wants to click on that. That will take you to the Just Giving page. But what you see there is the concept that Stuart came up with. I kind of like it. I don't see any reason why that design would change at the moment.
No.
A brick-built structure, which we're still in that kind of concept stage and deciding what type of brick would last beyond the life of you and I. And as you can see, in the middle will be the sculpture, and underneath it will be the wording from John A. Logan. So underneath the brass sculpture will be a marble plaque, and it will say something. It will ultimately say that we are, remembering UK veterans of the American Civil War, and that wording from John A. Logan. So yeah.
And again, the location hopefully will be in St Pancras I nearly said station then, sorry, cemetery.
Yeah, well, I mean, unless the cemetery say no, it might end up being at the station. But yeah, I mean, a tentative yes, but obviously we're going to have those discussions with the cemetery. And I think ultimately, once we get the plaque and be able to show that we are absolutely serious about this, and serious to the point that we've already generated, as collectively through PayPal and Just Giving, just over £2,000 for towards the construction of this. I'd imagine that ultimately it may cost more, but we need to start putting a plan in place. And for me, this monument, the centerpiece of it ultimately is that plaque, and that's going to be where it is. And unless there's any reason to say, there will even be some little nuggets, some Easter eggs, as it were, a nod by us towards Abraham Lincoln that will exist within that monument, and that will be known only to us, as it were. But that again has been kindly been initiated by Stuart, and I'll say no more than that.
Okay, so anyway, guys, we're gonna wrap this up in a minute, but just quickly before we do, firstly, go out and buy Gina's book. It is available on Amazon. It is the complete story of George Denham's story, also the story of how Gina got to the point where she is now, and with the dedication and everything. And again, it's called The Spartan Who Climbed Lookout Mountain. It's available on Amazon. So you do have another book in the process as well, Gina, I understand as well. So that'll be coming soon, won't it?
Yep. Brought up to about 21 pages, and it really is centering around once the Civil War ended, people returned to their homes, that the ripples of the Civil War played forward for decades, and that played forward in terms of people's ill health, etc., the effect on widows, etc. And obviously, whilst 50,000 people, say, from the UK may have served in that conflict, many of whom sort of assimilated with American society and culture and stayed in the North America, at least 1 or 2% returned to their mother country, and certainly to the UK, that 1 or 2% certainly came back. There are other people conducting research for people from their own countries, etc. But that's the model for at least book number 2. We will be shedding light on the comrades of George Denham, but not just the London branch American Civil War veterans, any person. And perhaps where the Grand Army Republic, who were obviously the great mediators who lobbied Congress to support these veterans for services rendered. One of the things I've noticed is that when I've gone through the annual encampment journals, is that they did memorialise their commanders, etc., whether they were born in England or Ireland, etc. But very little attention was given to their comrades who lived overseas. They even debated in 1887, Peter Joseph Osterhaus, who'd served down in the Chattanooga campaign, who'd returned to Germany, and they debated some 30 years after the Grand Army Republic formed whether he should be mustered into the ranks of the Grand Army Republic. So as much as they were really innovative in their work, perhaps they weren't always as inclusive, consciously or unconsciously, as they perhaps could have been, and Peter perhaps never enjoyed that peer support that was provided, say, for example, like organisations like the London branch. So yeah, book 2, my aspiration is to really shed light on the Civil War experiences, but the post-Civil War lives of veterans who'd returned to the UK. Not all of them were British born. There were some Americans who settled in the United Kingdom after the Civil War, and they died here. So you've got Richard Townley Booth, who was in part of the temperance movement. He died in Pickering in Yorkshire in 1917. You've got Seth Herrick, who was the president of the London branch. He'd been a major in the Maryland unit. There's lots, and the part that history, as much as you've got great people like Michael Hammerson who've been putting online articles out that are, as near as I understand, no books on those UK veterans who returned, men and women, and I feel that needs to be addressed. So even the book will contain an in memoriam section for those veterans for each year that they passed away. So yeah, that's book 2.
Cool. And eventually we will also have a website, but
Yes.
that's a little way away yet. And what this is, the goal for this is to have a central database of all this information for all these veterans, but also a way for, so we, because it took Gina a long time to get to this point. We don't want other people to go through that experience. So we will, we're there now as well, so if you do contact the Monuments for UK Veterans American Civil War Association, we will try and help. If you've got you've been trying to piece together a jigsaw puzzle of a relative that fought in the Civil War, then please contact us. But eventually we'll have this central database and it'll be like a monument, but it'll be an online monument to all those people. And just lastly, Gina, if people want to donate to our amazing cause, because we're getting there, we're creeping there slowly, but we do need the support of people. We do need people's donations. So just quickly tell people how they can donate to our great cause.
Okay, so we do have a Just Giving page, and if you put the Monumental Project on Google it, you'll find that. You can, if you go to our Facebook page, you will see a link there. Now, we've recently decided, because we need some accessible cash, because that 3,000 is locked up, so the £2,000 that we've nearly gained so far through Just Giving, 62% of our target achieved, is locked in until the £3,000 is reached. We cannot release it yet. So meanwhile, what we've done for the next month, we've created a PayPal fundraiser. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can find the fundraiser again. It's on our Facebook page. But also, if people want to donate just using our Gmail address, which is civilwarhq civilwarukmonumentalproject@gmail.com. So you can donate that way. I'll repeat that again. It's civilwarukmonumentalproject@gmail.com. And we've had a couple of more donations since. So people may ask, well, why do you need this, the PayPal fundraiser? But there are hidden costs that come through the work that we're doing. So say, for example, the plaques, the sculptures that Stuart has cast. We have some resin copies, which we will be shipping over. We need to get the master cast, which is going to be struck in bronze, shipped over. Well, that ultimately, we need to get access to these in the here and now before we can even get the monument in place. And they will also form part of our, if you like, fundraising initiative, that people can actually feel them, see them, touch them, etc. At our events for 2023. And we were speaking before we came on the podcast, but we've got some great ideas for next year, some really to try and put what we're doing for 2023 on the map and really highlight we're serious about what we're doing. And I think in the main people realise that, but ultimately, the pound signs, the dollar signs are the ones that make a difference. A like on Facebook is wonderful, but a like will not build this monument. A share, if people can't afford to donate, but they can use the power of social media and share a post, then they can reach, if somebody's got 200 or 300 people as friends on Facebook, that's a reach of 300 people. So people may not be able to afford to donate. I appreciate that. We live in austere times, and for people who've died 100 years ago, may not be a good fit for people now, because people obviously dealing with problems of the 21st century. But it doesn't cost anything to share a post on social media. It costs nothing. And I think, there can be some real ambassadors out there. The worth of this endeavour is sharing knowledge, not just those veterans who've gone, to their graves, but sharing knowledge about what we're doing in the here and now to, give them the honour of remembrance. And I would suggest that we all want to be remembered in some way. The idea of being forgotten for some people could be quite excruciating. So
yeah,
that's it. So so we've got the Just Giving, and we've got the PayPal. And as I say, if you want to donate, Civil War UK Monumental Project @gmail.com, and you can make a PayPal. We do have a bank account, but I won't be revealing those details on this podcast.
Okay, cool. And I shall leave obviously links to all of that stuff on the description of the podcast. Also, if you are listening just as audio, remember, if you come over to American Civil War and UK History's YouTube channel, you can see the pictures that we were describing in the podcast. That is important. And also, we do have other bits of content from our association on the American Civil War and UK History YouTube channel. We have James O'Neill's dedication in full, which was recorded. And going forward, we do the odd video here, there, and everywhere when we get the chance to try and obviously push our association out there. But anyway, all that's left to say, ladies and gentlemen and guys, thanks for joining me, Gina. Thanks for joining me, Stuart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you all soon. Cheers.
Take care. See you later.